I'm Joyce Hornady. You might say accuracy is my business. I make bullets.
You are listening to the Hornady Podcast.
Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. This is the Hornady Podcast, and I'm your host, Seth. Thanks for joining us today. I've got a good panel for you to talk about today's topic. I've got marketeer, expert reloader, Preston, and I've got project engineer, also expert reloader, Ben Searing. Guys, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
It's our pleasure.
Now, I mentioned expert reloaders twice, two expert reloaders.
Wildly different practices and theories, and
as it turns out,
one of them's way better than the other.
Of course, that's me.
Yeah. Well,
in your head.
All right, let's define the term expert first. With X being a has-been and a spurt being a drip under pressure. That defines both of us.
All right, well, that's a good answer.
I've heard that before.
Yeah.
It's been a while, though.
And I'm bringing you guys on, specifically you two, because of your reloading prowess. Now, and slightly different, not just in practice, but also in the definition, I guess, or the use of the word expert reloader. Ben, you've been reloading for a really, really long time, and over time of doing something, you develop a certain process, and it works, and you become very fluent in all things reloading. And Preston, you haven't been reloading for maybe a decade now, and in that decade, you have squeezed in decades worth of reloading into 10 years, because literally you've done it almost every single day that you've been at Hornady Manufacturing.
Yeah, and when you start shooting competitively, the rounds really stack up. And you kind of, you figure out what works for you and what's needed, what's not. And we've all tinkered with stuff that we don't need, but when you're on the phone every day.
Yep, like in technical service.
We've talked about it before. Some people are pretty capable of multitasking and talking on the phone while reloading and doing. Some people aren't, but I was one of those that could. So a lot of times I'd be working and reloading simultaneously.
Yeah, and I loved it when somebody would call in and they'd ask you about something, and this, I know this happened to you. You're like, I am literally reloading that right as we speak.
Like your question, I'm literally doing.
Yeah. That's kind of cool, and that's kind of the personal service you get when you call Hornady. Is you get somebody that's actually an expert at what they're doing. But the reason for this podcast isn't about the expert type of high-level reloading. It isn't about the ultra-fine processes and the advanced techniques. What I'm doing on this podcast is I want to discuss some of those things that we take for granted because we've been doing them for so long. We've been doing them so much that we just take it for granted. But the novice or the beginner or the reloader who's been reloading just to basically duplicate a factory load but hasn't kind of diverged past that, some of those things that we just take for granted that aren't written down in a textbook. There's certain things that we just know.
Well, then at one point we had to probably ask a question for it.
Yep.
We had to ask somebody.
Because we couldn't find it in writing somewhere. And we had to go to somebody who learned it through experience. And so what really propagated all this was a friend of mine getting into reloading, and he's kind of texted me some questions and got no problem answering them, obviously. And I just realized, like, wow, I'm answering something that I know I had a question on years ago that was never written, and he's got the same question. Well, he's not the only one. We're not the only ones. So there's got to be a bunch of people out there that have these questions that they can't find written, explicit answers to. And so we're going to go over a bunch of those, probably not going to hit on all of them because we only came up with a list, but It's only what we could think of.
And maybe we might miss some, and it might spurn some conversation in the comments. Please drop them below. If there's something we didn't hit, I will answer it back in the comments.
We can do an addendum.
Yeah, we sure can.
Mm-hmm.
We're here.
Yep, exactly. So we're going to go over a few of these things that are common but not written. I don't know the proper verbiage to define this, but I feel like a lot of us have gone through this. And the first one that I want to outline was one of the questions that I got from that buddy of mine that's just getting into reloading. All right, I get my setup. I get the Hornady Handbook of Cartridge Reloading. I flip to the cartridge I want to load, and it says Federal 210 primer. That's a cool story. Maybe write a country song about it because I can't find them. They're non-existent. I don't have a Federal 210. I'd love to get one if you know a place. all I could get was Winchester WLR. Is that okay? Can I use a standard Winchester large rifle primer where it calls for a federal large rifle primer? So that was one question that I know it's not explicitly written when it's appropriate to swap primers from what's been called out in the manual. So kicking it over to the panel, when is it appropriate to make a swap to a different primer than what the manual calls for?
And maybe before you dive in, Ben, I do want to say, like, just an overarching theme to this may be you're a hand loader now. If you're asking this question, you're a hand loader and you are making your own stuff, right?
Yep.
So there's nobody to point a finger at but yourself.
Right.
Because when you point the finger, there's three of them pointing back at you, right?
Classic playground stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
So that all of this being said, we'll answer these questions, but you are responsible for what you're doing.
Yep.
Right?
You're the keeper of your own stuff. So calls for a federal 210 in today's market. Can't find them. I could find a WLR. Is that an okay swap? And when is that kind of stuff appropriate?
Well, if you have to load, it's appropriate when you can't find what's listed.
Yeah.
It's just important to note that the data that showed in that book as far as safe loads and charge weights were tested with that particular primer. That's why it's there. There's a lot of data at the beginning of that book that's there for you, like the velocities were obtained with this length of barrel out of this particular action. Well, doesn't mean you can't vary from that as far as primer goes. You have to use what you can find, and if a WLR is what you can find, you put it in there.
Mm-hmm.
But just don't start if you always had your load with the 210 at the top. You know, some people will start at a modest load. I say start bottom and work your way up. Be safe with it because each primer can act a little differently when it's fired. So when is it appropriate? To me, when you can't find what you're looking for, and once you have replaced it with that one, then you know the data is good for that particular primer because you've had your notes to make it true.
Yeah, and in that book, in the
page 36,
40, I thought it was in the 40s. We've got a nice little chart. Now it may not be the Bible itself either, but there are exchangeable primers.
I was right. It's 36.
Oh, you're right. He's always right.
That's not true.
He's always right. But we've got a nice little chart in there that says, hey, here's what a 210 is. Here's what you could also use for that as well. Mm-hmm. Now, I know from experience in some cartridges, and it'll change from cartridge to cartridge, that a WLR, in my experience, in like say a 6.5 Creedmoor, is going to give me 20 feet per second less on the average than maybe a CCI 200 or a Federal 210. So don't expect it to duplicate precisely what it's doing, but it is okay to do so.
Yep, and that's a great example of what Ben was saying is that the pellet, the cake that's in there, that's the actual explosive compound in a primer, it is different from primer brand to primer brand. And
you can see it as different colors.
You can see it's different colors, and it produces different pressure and different velocity. So that page 36 type of graph that shows you, the comparable primers in each, small rifle, small rifle Magnum, large rifle Magnum, etc. That is a good table to use, and it's appropriate to make a swap. However, like Ben had commented, if you've developed a load from a modest charge weight up to, right up there towards max, and you're getting maximum velocity, if you're going to swap primers with a maximum load, that's when you want to drop it down a little bit, reduce that load, maybe give it 10% or so, and then work back up because all primers are different. But if you're starting out of nowhere, you've got no charges developed and nothing, you're just looking to get a starting ground, yes, you can use any of those primers that are appropriate, like in that table there.
Just never start at max charge.
Yeah, exactly. Just don't start at max. And as you're creeping up, if you're not sure of signs of pressure,
yep,
and velocity is important to you, then obviously the next level is to get yourself a chronograph of some sort, so that you know what your velocity is, and watch for your signs of pressure. So
sage advice for any hand loader.
It's good. If you're any bit serious about hand loading, it's probably going to happen for you at one point or another if you're a rifle reloader.
Well, I can't think of a time in the past probably 8 years that I've tested a load, something that I've loaded, for the first time and not chronographed it.
Correct.
Like it is that important.
Whether it be on the Zero or the old magneto speed I used to have, and now I just run downstairs and shoot it across.
Well,
I do
shoot
that
across
too,
the older, but
but
I mean, yeah, it's I guess don't be scared of having to switch a primer. Obviously, it's not always going to be available.
Yeah,
So.
where it might not be appropriate, again, is you've worked up to max, or swapping from a standard large rifle, if that's what it's called for, to a Magnum.
Not do that.
Or vice versa. If it calls for a Magnum and you swap to a standard large rifle, sometimes it's going to work fine. Sometimes you're going to get hang fires, which can be pesky.
And I guess we can go into that a little bit. Primers are designed to ignite a certain amount, a window amount of a certain burn speed of powder. So if you deviate from that, you can get hang fires, you can get pressure, it's not ideal.
Right.
And Magnum doesn't always mean that it has more of this pellet or more of this charge.
Right.
It means more likely that it's probably a different composition of that charge.
Exactly. So you can start playing with stuff you don't want to at that point. But within the standard large rifle Magnum, or pistol, or whatever it may be, yes, you can move around in there. And if you work something up towards max and you go to substitute it, just back it off a little bit and work back up.
Can't find brand A of a certain category, you can go to brand B.
Yeah, and you'll find your favorites there too. There's a lot of us that have landed on a certain primer that I always default to if I can. So, and it's fun to play around. That's the essence of hand loading. Play around, buy them all.
And it may not be even something that was your choice, but because they had 4,000 of them in stock, you bought them all, and that's what you're gonna.
Yeah,
that's what you're going to use.
Now. Yeah,
you're going to figure it out, right? So we get it.
So the next one, another one that was a text message to me that I answered. So a bullet has a cannular on it. A lot of them do, like our Interlock, our SST, our CX bullets. They have cannulars cut around them. Now, the cannular is traditionally seated right at the case mouth. Well, in this particular case, the guy was pushing the bullet out to the lands and was going to back it off a set distance. But the cannular then was sticking out past the case mouth. Now, is there any problems with seating a bullet that has a cannular with that cannular sticking out past the case mouth?
As long as you have adequate bearing surface into the case neck and you're not into the rifling, there is no issue with that.
And to simplify that, what Preston means by that is adequate neck tension. Mm-hmm. The cannular is located at the end of the mouth so that you can crimp your case into that spot.
Okay.
So if you have adequate neck tension, i.e. bearing surface that is good and strong held in there, there's no problem with having that cannular. I've even seen some further into the case, some on the outside, depending on the location of the cannular. You might see the CX bullet, for example, with, I don't know if they're necessarily cannulars, but one relief of them is, grooves, but they're relief grooves. I've seen some of them out, and it doesn't hurt a thing, provided you've got adequate neck tension, bearing surface to hold that bullet in place so that nothing moves while you're firing it in battery or coming up
into the feed ramp.
One thing to note, though, if you do choose to do that, note that the seating dies, our seating dies especially, if you've had them set to crimp previously, you need to remove that, because that type of a seating die requires a cannular to be able to crimp into. It's too aggressive. So if you decided to seat it out and then you're still, you just adjusted your adjust and didn't adjust your crimp, and you're wondering why you're bubbling the necks, that's probably why.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I would say you could dive into just bullet manufacturing for a little bit, and this goes for anybody, is really, it's hard to have a specific, like say a 140 grain SST in 6.5. It's hard to have a specific one that we could use in a 6.5 Creedmoor and say a 6.5 Swede or a 260 round, or across the board, right?
Right. You got to put that location in one spot.
So exactly. if you'll look in the 6.5 Creedmoor manual, 140 SST, it's got it seated at the cannular.
Mm-hmm.
However, it's a ways away from touching the rifling. So the first time, I was using the overall length tool, checked it in my rifle, seated it 50 off. The cannular was out 200 thousandths.
Mm-hmm.
Now it shot well at both, seating depths consequently, but that is why you'll see some interesting overall lengths, just because bullets are made for a variety of cartridges, and a lot of times in reloading data we're going to seat it at the cannular.
Right. Yep. But if you have to seat that cannular out, no problem. Preston mentioned having adequate bearing surface in the case. A general rule, speaking in generalities, is about 1 caliber of bearing surface in the neck. And that's a general rule. It can be a little bit less than that for sure, but if it's a 25 caliber bullet, you want about a quarter inch of bearing surface in the neck.
That's the same rule I use when I advise folks on their Wildcats and what they want to do.
Yep, that's a good rule of thumb. So as long as you're not buried in the rifling and you've got about a caliber's worth of bearing surface in the case mouth, that cannler location, no problem whatsoever. Which brings us to our next point, which is, Ben, you talked about it already, the crimp.
The 338 Advanced Rifle Cartridge. Purposefully designed for hard-hitting subsonic performance, the 338 ARC delivers 1.5 times more energy than the 300 Blackout subsonic. Featuring the 307-grain Sub-X bullet in the subsonic line and the 175-grain hollow point in Hornady Black. The big little cartridge that packs a punch. The 338 ARC from Hornady.
First off, what is a crimp? When is it appropriate to a crimp? Do I need to crimp? What type of crimp? Are there different types? When is one type better than the other? So that's another question that somebody getting into reloading might not fully understand. So hit it broad level. What is a crimp? How do you apply it? We talked about the cannler already, so we can talk about that interaction. And let's talk about the type of crimps and when one is used over the other.
Go for it, Ben.
I don't know that we've ever argued about crimping in the past. I think we're pretty much in agreement.
But you're the expert. You're the real expert.
First of all, crimping is a process of taking the brass and squeezing it into the bullet. It's just that simple. Okay, yep. It's a process of grabbing that bullet like if you had claws, so that it can't move until it's fired. It can help, I suppose, if it's super consistent, exact same case length with your EVs because you've got the same amount of force.
Sure,
bringing it out. It can be detrimental if set wrong because it can actually loosen that bearing surface that you're talking about. But for me as a reloader, the reason I'm reloading, not only for accuracy, but sometimes it's to save a little money. And the more I move that brass, the harder it becomes, and eventually it breaks, just like a coat hanger. You keep bending it, right?
Yep.
So in my opinion, I only crimp if I absolutely have to.
Okay.
When do I have to? I can check it. Like if going into battery, if I've got a 500 Smith & Wesson, I got to crimp that thing. Okay?
Yep, big old revolver.
Yeah, the first round is going to probably knock some other looses out of the cylinder or push them in, which can cause pressure problems and all kinds of issues. So
lock your cylinder up.
If you find that feeding them up the ramp or something is moving your bullets.
Semi-automatic.
Exactly. And then you have to, and I don't want to go way down the rabbit hole, but you got to remember, again, the cannler, like I mentioned before, if there isn't a cannler, it has to be some sort of a taper crimp.
Mm-hmm.
Pistol calibers.
Let's talk about the different kinds of crimps. So there's a roll crimp and a taper crimp. There's also a factory crimp. We don't really do that as far as in a reloading.
It's very similar. The factory crimp is very similar to a roll crimp. Just moves the end of the cartridge case, squeezes it.
So if you can picture it with these old hands here,
big old
a roll crimp is more like this.
Yep.
Right. What kind of a degree would you estimate?
30 degree included, maybe 15 per side. So,
and then if you go to taper crimp, much more gradual, about like this,
4 degrees per side, or 3, or even 5. I mean, it just depends.
And a taper crimp can often be referred to as a profile crimp, and that's a good way to understand. Is it instead of just taking the mouth of the case and rolling it over, it's taking most of the case neck and leaning it into the bullet rather than rolling the
correct. And I guess where I differentiate, and I could be wrong, but I call a profile crimp for a bottleneck cartridge because I'm going to try to support that whole cartridge as I start to squeeze the taper, so I'm making sure it's not bulging somewhere that's going to give me problems with fitting in my chamber.
Yep.
Taper crimp ones, a lot of times are just at the end, like my 9s, my 45s, you have to bell those. So I do taper crimp those a little bit.
Sure.
And the reason that you would taper crimp those straight wall cartridges, that headspace on the case mouth, is just that reason. They headspace on the case mouth. So if you were to imagine, if you go too far on a roll crimp, that case mouth is gone. It's into the bullet,
and now you won't be headspacing correctly.
So that it counts on that case mouth to hit the chamber, the headspace.
So I guess if I had to just give a quick answer, crimp your pistol, don't crimp your rifle unless you have to.
Yep.
And then I would say with some of the heavier recoiling magnums, sometimes both is important, like a 500 Smith or a 460.
Yep.
You want to, those bullets actually have cannulars, so you can roll crimp and then taper crimp to get the utmost.
In fact, in die design, and I'll go down that rabbit hole, the 500 and the 460, a taper crimp die that didn't support the body wouldn't give us enough crimp. We've actually got a die that's actually got kind of a chamber in it with a crimp, a pretty aggressive crimp up inside it. So we have to support that whole case just to get enough crimp to hold it in there.
Yeah. So the crimp, there's two styles. There's a roll crimp and a taper crimp.
Mm-hmm.
The roll crimp, when you buy a standard set of Hornady reloading dice for any bottleneck rifle cartridge and a lot of pistol cartridges, it's going to have the ability to roll crimp. If you're going to roll crimp, the bullet has to have a cannular. When you'd want to roll crimp would be a lever action or a semi-automatic, something that's a little bit, going to beat up on that bullet a little bit. On a lever action, you want that bullet to stay put so that it doesn't walk out on you under recoil, because that could lock up your action. On a heavy recoiling magnum like a 338 Win Mag, for example, might not hurt to have a little extra grip on that bullet so that your cartridges in the magazine are staying put. On the pistol side, on a case that Headspace is on the case mouth, like the 9, 40, 10 millimeter, 45 auto, 380, you'll want to taper crimp those, because you don't want to roll that case mouth. And if you try to roll crimp and there's no cannular on the bullet, you'll actually loosen the grip on the bullet because that brass has nowhere else to go. And so it's going to create a small bulge there.
Mm-hmm.
And then lastly, on your big magnums, big magnum handguns, not 44, but like 44 Casull, 460, 500 Smith, those bullets have cannulars. And for the same reasons as a lever action, you need that bullet to stay put. And with that violent recoil, if you don't have a good crimp, that bullet will generally walk out on you and can lock your cylinder up. So roll crimp it and then put a taper crimp over the top of it. But
there's a good synopsis.
Yes.
Because we went all over the place.
Yeah.
We did one question at a time.
I was just hitting the summary.
But I mean, I hope that our listeners can understand that we're, in general, crimping is a preference.
Yeah, and for the most part, if you're reloading bottleneck rifle stuff from, say, 300 PRC on down, that's going in a bolt action rifle, don't crimp whatsoever.
Probably not going to need it. And the only reason that I say on a straight wall pistol that you have to have it, is because in the reloading process you bell the mouth to get your bullet in there. You have to at least crimp it enough to get the bell gone.
Yep.
And I guess a little trick, and a lot of people didn't know it because I talked to him about it when I was in tech, is the push test.
Yep.
If you're loading 9 millimeter for the first time and you think you have adequate enough crimp, you push that bullet head, put the base of the case on your thumb, push it against your reloading bench hard. I mean hard.
Yeah.
And if it moves, you don't have enough crimp.
Right.
Something else is wrong. If it doesn't move, it stays put.
You're good to go.
You're on the money.
You sure? I mean,
yeah.
I might be an anomaly.
He's right. That's how I do the test. I push down or push it against the bench, and if it didn't go anywhere, I realize I'm not pushing as hard as maybe a recoil could be. But
one last thing after my synopsis on the crimp was, if you're going to roll crimp, if it's been decided I'm shooting a lever gun, I'm loading ammo for, to go in my AR or something like that, and I have a cannular, crimping is very critical, case length is very critical to crimping.
I was just going to add that.
If your case length varies quite a bit, that die is set on putting that crimp on a certain length. So you want to make sure your cases are trimmed uniform if you're going to crimp.
Exactly.
All right. Moving on now, I just mentioned it, to trim length. So in the book, you're going to have a trim length, a recommended trim length. You go to SAMI, you're going to have a window. You look at a SAMI print of what the case length should be. When do I need to trim? Do I trim one at a time? Do I measure all my cases and just trim the ones that are long? What about if my cases are shorter than the trim length? Let's talk all about trim length, because there is some confusion. If you open up that manual, you'll see a maximum length, you'll see a trim length, but we don't list a minimum length.
Right.
What's going on here?
Well, and I'll go to the 223 for an example in this manual. A lot of times we'll have a max case length, which is from SAMI, and then our trim length is typically 10 thousandths less than that. However, if you mentioned, what if I get something shorter than that? Is that okay? Well, then I would recommend checking out the free website, sammy.org, and going to the cartridge and chamber drawings, and you'll notice there that the minimum case length is about 40 thousandths under the maximum, I believe, on a 223.
20.
No, it's more. I swear.
It's 20.
All right. You guys converse. I'll prove you wrong.
All right. Anyway, Preston is right. When we set the data in our manual, and if you're using somebody else's manual, it may be the same or it may be different, but we give you the max case length. That's at the point that you need to trim.
Yep.
Because if you don't, it can cause interference in your chamber. So you're actually like crimping the bullet as you're trying to fire it. If you close the bolt, you're squeezing it.
Well, and I think in a bolt-action rifle, if you're not really intimately familiar with how rifle actions work, the average consumer might not know the incredible mechanical advantage that you have when you cam that bolt down.
Yeah.
When you close the bolt,
you can ton of mechanical advantage.
You can crush that case. If your case is too long, you'll crush that into the bullet and not even know it.
Once you get it started, you've got so much thrust and so much movement forward yet that it pushes it.
Yep.
So as far as the trim lengths, we stay inside SAMI. So we give you a max case length. That's the point you would need to trim, and then a trim 2 length.
Yep.
If you want to trim less, look at SAMI. Go less. Go to their min.
Yeah,
a lot of times it's 20. Preston says the 223 is 40. It might be. I'm not going to argue. I've not seen too many past 20. So he's looking her up right now on cartridge length.
I was slightly wrong, but you were also wrong.
Okay.
It's 30 thousandths under max.
Sure. So you got your max length that we're going to print in the manual. We're going to have a recommended trim length.
Mm-hmm.
And generally, if you check SAMI, you could go an additional 10 or 15 thou below that.
Now, as far as do I trim the long ones, do I trim the short ones? No, you first of all, if you crimp, you got to make them all the same. Okay?
Yeah.
If you don't crimp, I would set my trimmer up to whatever trim length that I want, whether it's the SAMI, whether some guys wanted only 3 off and they trim a lot, right?
Yep.
It can also depend on how many times you fire the case or the case design versus the chamber design. Some just grow more.
Right.
The first time you fire a new case, if you bought new ammo, will be in my experience, when they grow the most. Okay. So a lot of times the first time you trim, you might get 2 or 3 times before you trim it again. But I pick a number that I'm going to trim to. I find a case longer than that number. I trim it, and my trimmer's set. I trim them all. Even if it doesn't trim one, I keep them all going to that. And then when those other ones get too long, eventually the one that's short is going to get there.
Right.
That's how I do it, because I choose not to crimp.
I think there's a bigger question here too. There's a bigger picture. Like, what is this ammo for?
Oh,
right?
yeah.
At the end of the day, if I'm just loading this because I want to go hang out with my friends and shoot at the range, and it's underneath trim length and you're not crimping, don't trim it at all.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I think every reloader has a certain level of OCD, so it's how much can it handle. We've talked with people who we've literally given instructions to, and then 2 seconds later we're moving on to the next step, and they're reversing what we just told them. And you know the guy.
I know the guy.
Right? So everybody's got a certain tick or level to it. So it's like, what are you capable of being okay with? Because
but
at the
not
end of the day,
okay
if
with
it's just
max.
if it's just range ammo, it doesn't really bother
as
me.
long as it's within the window.
And not okay with maximum. And keep in mind, because I'm a nerd, I'm an engineer, that the further back that you trim that, the more of my chamber neck is exposed, and the more carbon I can build up on that chamber neck.
Yep.
So then I can cause issues if I get the next lot of brass and it's longer, and I didn't get that carbon ring cleaned out of there. That's something to think about. It's not something that anybody beginning loader should worry about, but I've had guys use cases in Wildcats that are 100,000 short of what they should be because it's all they can find.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's something to be aware of. But those are there for guidance. Like he said, I don't trim unless it's at SAMI max, but if I'm going to crimp, I got to crimp. I've got to make sure they're all the same length.
Yep, 100%.
So it's a good thing. Yeah, it's, again,
I'm on
to trim or not to trim.
The same boat. If it's range ammo and it's within tolerance,
send it.
Then I'm loading it. If it's something where I need it to crimp, or I'm going on a big hunt or whatever, I'll trim everything uniform just to keep it uniform. And if it's range ammo and I've got a bunch of brass and some of it needs trimmed, all of it's going through
It's
the
all
trimmer.
going because we're going to run it through that new trimmer, and it's got a 3-way cutter on it.
Yeah. So that, for me, trim length, that's one that we get that question a lot. Hopefully that answers it. Here's a quick one that just came to me. How often do you need to chamfer and deburr the case? Do you only do it after you trim? Do I need to do it before every loading? What do you guys say?
After every trim.
I do it every time I load. And it may not even be loaded, right? It may not even be trimmed, but I'm going to chamfer it. At least an inside chamfer. Make sure that it's nice and smooth before I seat a bullet in it.
Regardless, like Ben said, if you trim, you chamfer and deburr. That's a non-negotiable.
Correct.
In between trimmings, but subsequent reloadings, I do like to give it an inside chamfer, simply because that bullet's going in there nice and smooth. It's easy. I'm not getting weird resistance versus sometimes you could get a mouth that gets boogered up on ejection or something like that.
On ejection, in the gravel, in the tumbler for that matter. All those cases are hitting each other.
It depends on how you treat your brass after. If you're just loading it, the chamfer didn't go anywhere that you put on it the first time. But if you're tumbling, you've got to remove any bit of burr that would be inside the neck.
Yep.
At all times. I mean, you don't want that to interfere with your bullet.
The 6mm GT. Get the competitive edge and the eye of the tiger. Designed from the very beginning to be an amazing all-around precision rifle competition cartridge. Available in the Hornady match ammunition line with the 109-grain ELD match bullet. When the competition is on the line, trust the proven pedigree of the 6mm GT from Hornady.
All right, moving on to another one that we get pretty often, and Preston, you summed it up really well before we even started going through these bullet points, which is there's no finger to point. You are your own keeper. This is your ammo that you are making, and that's the essence of hand loading. That's the fun part. Like, you can just load to save some money and duplicate factory ammo, but I don't know anybody that actually does that. I know people that started with that in mind, but next thing you know, they're buying different primers and trying different powder, and they're going down the rabbit hole like we all do.
Got sucked in.
They did, yes. And that's what's created hand loaders in the first place, and that's the fun part. That's the wildcatter in all of us. So this next topic is, what if I don't have data? I have data for 175 grain bullet with the powder I want, but it's not the exact 175 grain bullet. It's there. I have data for one with a flat base, but not for one with the boat tail. Mine's got the boat tail. And what do I do in that situation where there is not an exact recipe for the exact components that I have? What do you do there?
I got into this when I initially started. I was doing all sorts of crazy things because I got sucked in.
Yep.
I was engulfed in hand loading, and I wanted to know.
It was way cheaper.
everything to know about it, right? So I was actually even like making my own bullets and with lead molds and stuff, right? Our old boss was nice enough to give me like a lineman manual that had both copper and lead bullets and strictly lead bullets. So turns out, I found out later on, they have a strictly like lead bullet data book, but I couldn't find exactly the one I wanted. It was about the same weight and about the same shape, but after looking through all of the different data sources that there is, that was as close as I could find, so I had to do that. Now, there wasn't a wide range on the particular powder that I wanted to use, so I had no choice but to start in the middle of it, because the bullet weight wasn't exactly correct, and the bullet shape wasn't exactly correct. So I thought that was the safest thing for me to do in that instance.
Mm-hmm.
But like if you're looking for like you're talking about a 175, lead core copper jacket bullet, I always personally use the bullet manufacturer's data first if it's available.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
If that is not available, I will move to the powder manufacturer's data.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And again, there's the key word. The first place, if I don't have it in my book, go to the powder manufacturer.
Yep.
They have data on that, and they won't only shoot, for instance, Hornady bullets, Hornady data. They'll have data on some other different types of projectiles.
Yep.
And I, like Preston, would do the same thing. I would find something of approximately the same shape, same weight, and I would
Same
start
material.
low. Yep. Same type of material. Same bearing surface more so. Because to me, that bearing surface or bearing length is what's going to give me the pressure along with the weight in my cartridge. So I would find something close to that, and I would start low and work up and just be very cautious. That's how I would do it.
And again, in a nutshell, that's how we got here as hand loaders in the first place. And I get it gives me a warm and fuzzy when I have this exact bullet with this exact case and this primer and this powder, and somebody else has already tested this.
Yeah.
That makes me feel warm and fuzzy. But for the hefty majority of reloaders as a thing, that wasn't available. You had some generalities, and you had to interpolate a little bit, and you had to start modest and work up. And again, that's the essence of hand loading in a nutshell. That this is you. This is yours. And although that might not make you feel super warm and fuzzy initially, you'll get the hang of it. And again, if you're working up towards max, that's you have to be very careful. But just finding a starting point, bullet manufacturer, a cup and core bullet versus a monolithic bullet, something to be mindful of. If the bullet manufacturer doesn't have data, check the powder manufacturer. You can find something that's really close, and then you have to use your best sound judgment and proceed with caution.
Yep. And make a call if you're curious and you're really stumped.
Yep.
That's why we have a tech line.
Yep.
That's why you can call Hodgdon. That's why all of these people have technical advisors that may not give you the exact answer, but they'll point you in the right direction.
Right. And this is another big plug for having a chronograph. Like you mentioned, Ben, you can see the difference of swapping primers on your velocity. Well, we know that, okay, given a certain bullet weight and a certain barrel length, the velocity with these propellants should be in this window. And if you're well under that window or exceeding that window, you know where you're at. Yep. All right. Moving on to overall length of a cartridge and mag length and that consideration. There's been many phone calls I've had in my technical service days. Preston, I know you have too. When you get somebody who's just getting started reloading and there's kind of a disconnect of, this doesn't fit in the magazine, but I want it 50 off the lands. What am I supposed to do here? So talk about just that relationship between overall length and the magazine restriction.
Sure. Well, I guess to start out, in my opinion, if you're just starting out, if you have the exact bullets data that you're loading for, start with that overall length that the manufacturer recommends.
Sure.
Just start there.
Yep.
But to dive into it a little bit more, if you're going to use a tool and determine your overall length in your rifle with a particular bullet, and you found that, holy cow, if I seat this 20 thousandths off the lands, which is what everybody on the internet told me I should do for the best accuracy, it doesn't fit in my magazine.
Yep.
Guess what?
Do you want a single feed?
You can
or do you want it to fit in your magazine?
Or you can get it to fit in your mag.
One way or the other. Or you can take it to a gunsmith. There might be guys that can modify those magazines, make it bigger to fit in there.
That's another option, is maybe a magazine without a binder plate or something like that.
Correct. There's options, but in the grand scheme of things, you're limited.
Yeah. And it seems like a painfully simple answer, because it is, but I do feel like the amount of call volume that we've taken on this in our technical service days, between the two of us, maybe 100,000 phone calls, it seems to be a disconnect. It's a painfully simple answer, but you can't have your cake and eat it too in this scenario.
That's right. And some custom rifles allow for a little extra, and that's why you can get away with it. We even have some bullets. Some loads, I believe, I forget, it's 30 cal something or another. This bullet is not loadable to.
There's several of them, like specifically the 30 cal 212 ELDX.
That's what it is.
We have data for it, I believe, in a 300 Win mag, but in quite a bit of factory rifles, it's not going to fit in the magazine.
Yeah, probably almost all of them. Yeah,
unless it's a custom
we
rifle.
stay that, so you can see that information there too. But you've got, like you said, rob from Peter to pay Paul.
Yep.
Can't have your cake and eat it too, however you want to put it.
So moving on to a similar and related topic, seating depth and that overall length gauge. So, Preston, you said you can just get the book, you can look right in the manual and say, oh, it recommends this seating depth. When would you consider getting an overall length gauge and pushing that bullet out past what it says in the manual?
So I had to do this initially when I started. I know, Ben, you've probably done a lot of it as well, but when I was first starting here, I was more budget minded in my rifle choices, my barrel choices, like all of it, right? And in particular, I fought a certain rifle that I was just loading out of the book, and I decided, well, hey, let's find the overall length and let's seat it closer to the lands. Maybe my free bore is big, and I mean, I've said it on here before. It's the 300 Win Mag.
Yeah.
So the free bore was big.
Yeah,
on
it was.
And I had to get that bullet pretty darn close to the rifling so that it would start into that rifling straight. And I fought that thing so hard, and I'm glad I finally did that. But when I'm struggling with accuracy, typically is when I will find it. If I'm kind of paying attention to competition rifle barrels, which I really don't pay that much attention to anymore. I'm sure there are people that are. They will follow the rifling out and see the throat wear, right, or the rifling wear,
yeah.
right. So they can follow it and kind of get a feel of when they think their barrels are done.
Mm.
It's funny that you mentioned 300 Win Mag.
Is it?
That's exactly my first foyer into, I want to seat this out. And this was before I was too naive. Maybe Stony Point was there before they became Hornady parts.
Yeah,
I don't know. But, you size the case down and you keep using an expander so you can get the bullet just to push with the bolt. And you color the bullet black and you push it with the bolt and you see the rifling.
Yep.
So I tried that, and it was just kind of an abysmal failure. So I just seated them where I always did, right? And those of you that listen to this podcast know that I've said that rifle's minute a deer, and it's still minute a deer. But come a few years later, bam, wow, we got this real cool case. I even took my own case because I had the ability to, even though we had a 300 Win Mag modified case.
The overall length
I
gauge.
took my fired case in, we drilled and tapped it, slapped my 150 spire point. To this day, that rifle shoots it lights out, or minute a deer.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to make it shoot even better, right? Because when I first started, like an inch was lights out, right?
Yeah.
Now it's quarter inch. Like when you start getting into this reloading world, prepare yourselves, because you might think, well, inch. What do you mean inch? I can hold that all day long. Anyway,
It depends how many shots.
So exactly, it's all the number of shots. Okay, so I grab this tool, I slide my bullet in there, take my bolt out, slide my bullet in my old Winchester, I pull the tool out. No bullet. I thought it fell on there. I slid it back in there, try to get my data. The throat's so far gone, the 150 spire point is out of the case before it touches the lens.
Yep.
So that was my first foray into seating it. Obviously, when you decide that you do want to go down that road, it might be for his reason, for accuracy, for me just seeing that I could see, because it was accurate enough, and I've just kind of left it alone and settled with it. I shoot the modern stuff in it, 212s. Now, do I need to? No, because the 150s does everything I'm ever going to do with that rifle. It was a keepsake rifle. It's my father's rifle, so it's not going to change. I'm not going to rebarrel it. I'm going to see, how many generations can keep killing deer with it, right? So, but you'll experience when you want to go down that road, have the tools to do it and do it right,
Yep.
And specific, to be very specific, we're talking about the Hornady overall length tool. It comes in a straight option and a curved option, and then you need a modified case to screw on it in the chambering of your choice. And if we don't have it, or you want to be very particular, you can send in a fired case to us, and we will modify the back of that case to screw onto the tool.
Yep.
And that was fired out of your rifle, and you're sticking it back in there.
That's something if you want to go down that road. Do you, as a beginner, do you want to do that? That's up to you. I think that's when I'm comfortable with reloading. What can I do next? That's it, right?
That's it.
Yeah.
Well, first I'm going to tell you Headspace. That's the first thing I'm going to tell you about setting your die. We're probably not going to talk about that today, but
we are.
First step is go Headspace. Second step, let's look at length.
Seating depth.
Yep.
And then the third would be measure to the ogive, not to the tip of the bullet, because the tips can vary.
Yep. But yeah, as far as that overall length gauge goes, if you're going to play with your overall length, that gauge is an invaluable tool because it lets you repeatedly measure where that bullet engages the rifling, and then you can adjust it from there and know that you're making a correct adjustment based off where that contact point is. Is there a huge advantage to it? Maybe, maybe not. Probably a lot of it depends on your chamber and your bullet. I think on a traditional chamber, we've been beating up on the 300 Win Mag. But any traditional chamber, you're probably going to see more benefit from an accuracy standpoint, pushing those bullets out to the rifling. On a PRC or a Creedmoor, probably not going to see much difference at all.
I have found that modern cartridges of today doesn't matter.
Yep. And that's done on purpose.
I would say bullet type does matter.
Sure.
Because those monolithics, they seem to like more of a running start.
Yep.
That's a question that we get sometimes too, because honestly, that was a frequent one. But hey, I'm going to shoot the CX, should I get that 10 or 20 off the lands? No, I start at 50 and move backwards.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they're like, what? Well, I've heard that, some bullets are particular in that way.
You're going to be limited too with the chamber's design and the throat that's in the chamber. You might not be able to go 50 off the lands or 100 off the lands because bullets going to be clearing the case. But I found that, and I'll challenge you to look at, Sammy, look at the tolerances between bullet and the throat, I guess you would call it, the free bore of older cartridges, 30-06s, 3/8, the diameter alone. And I think that's where we found that the jump is less significant because the diameter is tighter on the newer cartridges.
Holding the bullet straighter. Yep.
Match-proven bullet profiles that shooters love, now perfected by Hornady. Aero Match Bullets, featuring the most popular match bullet profiles and weights from across the industry. Affordable match-winning performance, unrivaled availability, unmatched bullet consistency. Aero Match Bullets from Hornady. Shoot the best.
Yep. All right. So overall length, you can definitely play with it. Be considerate. Like you said, monolithic bullets tend to like a little bit more jump. Our ELD matches, ELDXs, gosh, 30 to 130. They seem to be pretty forgiving out of our chambers. If you're shooting a non-Hornady design chamber or, kind of a standard traditional chamber, those lead core bullets tend to do really well, 20 to 50 off in there.
Remember the old AMAXs? 5 into them. 5 into the lands, right?
Yeah, well, those days are not gone, but they're...
And that's something, too, that probably isn't on that list, but if somebody scours the internet enough, they're going to find people talking about, I'm shooting a 10 thou jam.
Yep.
That's pretty advanced stuff.
And kind of old school, really.
And I would only have somebody look into that if they have already tried 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 off and not found any luck whatsoever.
The unfortunate part about a jam is generally you have to fire that cartridge once you chamber it. Because if you try to pull it, that bullet, if you're jammed enough, is going to stick in the rifling and you're going to dump powder.
Not to mention it plays with your pressure. It plays with how that performance. So your normal load, again, I would back that down if I was going to jam it.
Well, if you're going to jam, you have to back it down.
Because you're going to end up, with some high pressure. So is that for the novice? Absolutely not.
Okay. So that's seating depth and overall length and the overall length gauge. Ben, you already hit on this one. You were a step ahead.
Sorry.
Headspace.
Boom. The number one thing you can do to improve your accuracy as a reloader is to control your headspace. Now, when I say control your headspace, the only thing you can do that on is bottleneck cartridges.
Yep.
Okay, you can't do it on a straight wall cartridge or rimmed cartridge. You can do it on a belted mag, though.
Sure.
Typically, the belted mag
Well,
headspace is on the belt.
Let's get into that after we hit just headspace in
Let's
general.
just say you get your first reloading kit. I'm going to reload for 6.5 Creedmoor. Talk to me about headspace and controlling the headspace.
In my opinion, that's the absolute, like you talked about, the first thing you should do. And I would recommend that any novice, after they've maybe loaded some bulk 223 or some 9mm, they get into that if they're going to load for their 270, their 308, their 6.5 Creedmoor, whatever have you. Mm-hmm. Because number one, it's a safety thing. Like if you're going to use a headspace comparator and you know that you have a piece of brass that's the longest that my rifle fired, I can set the die up to bump it 2, 3, 4, 5 thousandths, and we know that is safe. If you go too far, you're creating headspace, right? And you definitely don't want to do that because if you have a case head separation in a novice, that's gonna stink.
Yeah, a case head separation or a misfire. Got too much headspace.
Yeah, and I might want to mention too that most of the time that's not supposed to happen because if you've got a rifle that you purchased, all right, they had to hold manufacturing SAMI specs in there our reloading dies, I can't speak for everybody's, but I would say the majority of them also keep their dies to that SAMI spec. So the most you're probably going to see is like on ours, new ones I'm setting up to 6, some of the old ones about 10 thousandths bump.
Okay.
And that's where we're all taught. Thread that die down tight on the shell holder, right? Well, when we use a comparator to measure that tool, or to measure that headspace, and we discussed that a little bit, and I only want to go 3, I go down to the die, and then I can start backing it up. And there's other things out there to make that process easier, but it can be as simple as that. But it's the very first thing that, like he said, that a reloader should do if he wants to improve accuracy. Yep. Because if it came out of my chamber and I know what the longest it can be, and I only give it minimal bump, it fits my chamber better now.
Well, it'll work for a lot of reasons. If you are bumping the shoulder back a certain amount of thousandths, like for instance, we're all shooting for 2 for the most part in our bolt action rifles,
except for hunting cartridges.
Yeah,
maybe you.
See, this is where you're wrong. I knew it would happen.
Controlling your headspace with a headspace comparator is safe. It makes for better fit and feeding. It can potentially help with, well, it definitely can help with accuracy. Like there's a myriad of reasons to
makes
do
your brass
this.
last longer.
Makes your brass last longer.
Unless you move it, the better you are.
So there's a lot of reasons that a headspace comparator should be in any reloader, bottleneck rifle cartridge reloader's arsenal.
And in this example, you got the guy that buys his first reloading kit. He's got the 6.5 Creedmoor. Definitely consider picking up a headspace comparator. And so the headspace is from basically the breech face to the contact point. Now that could be the rim, could be on the shoulder, could be on the mouth of the case, depending on what it is. But we're talking bottleneck rifle. So that's going to be a datum line around the shoulder. And by using a comparator, you can, if you set your die up for a full length resize, it's going to knock that shoulder back, would you say 6 thousandths of an inch?
6, yep.
So that brass is going to swell that much further. Well, you can enhance your accuracy, make your brass last longer if you simply use a headspace comparator and adjust that sizing die to only push your shoulder back, like you said, about 2 thou for a bolt action rifle, maybe 3 or 4 for a hunting rifle and a bolt action. If it's a semi-automatic, maybe 5 or so, 5. It's important to bump the shoulder back some, but you don't have to do all of it. Yeah,
and it's important that you noted that semi-autos, they like a little bit more, okay? They have to feed and go into battery.
Yep.
So that's important that you noted that. The 3 to 4 thousandths is because Preston thinks he never misses, and his next round at 2 when it's hotter is going to be because you need it to be, and because he thinks it's just going to go in there and his second shot isn't going to be needed. But we all know that sometimes that second was important, and I like to make sure that that's why you're seeing the variance between Preston and I and him going 2 and on my hunting stuff.
No. And you're joking here, but in all seriousness, I think it does matter on the cartridge that you're doing, right?
True.
Because I've noticed that when I loaded 6 ARC, I can control that headspace a lot more than I am something way bigger, right? Because it's only 28, 30 grains of powder, right? It's a smaller case. So I'm moving less brass and I can do it more consistently. And I don't really shoot a lot of big stuff. And if I do, a lot of times I'm just grabbing factory ammo. But on the stuff that I'm hand loading, I feel a lot more comfortable because I know that I'm controlling that maybe plus or minus 1 thou.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. I understand that. There's something you brought up and totally lost it now.
Welcome to the club.
I'm sorry. I'll think of it again and then I'll bring it up.
That's all right. Well, moving on to the next one. Talking about headspace, you have to have an appropriate amount so that it will feed and function.
Correct.
If you're a novice reloader, if you're an advanced reloader, and you're making a good-sized batch of ammo, you need to make a dummy round.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's very important. And I don't know why we don't teach that, but we should. Everybody should have a dummy round of that load.
Yep.
At that seating length, that particular case, and you should try that in your rifle. Don't go, I got it, and load 100 of them and find out none of them fit.
Yeah, because if you don't have your headspace right, that round will physically not chamber.
And not only check your case after you've bumped it, check your case in your rifle, load the bullet and check it again because that can affect some things too.
Yep.
Yeah, and a little tip or trick or whatever. If you look at my reloading die boxes, open up half of them and you're going to see dummy rounds in it.
And
they're written on with a Sharpie.
Exactly.
That said, hey, this is a in 223. This is a 55 grain GMX at the time, and it's loaded at this length. It has this, a crimp. And not only can I make sure that fits and feeds, but I can also use it to set up the die if I move that die for something else.
At least setting the seating die.
Depth and the crimp.
Yeah, you can do it with both of those, and it does help. It gets you far closer than would have been starting over.
Exactly.
And it's good enough for me. I can promise you that.
Yeah. And I'm the guy that when I change loads, I get a different seating die. So some of my boxes, if I've got 3 different bullets, I have 3 different seating dies in there.
Oh wow!
Because I don't want to play with them. I don't want to move them.
Yeah, you can label them.
Yeah.
I had a call in my technical service days. This was probably been like 2014 or so. Had a gentleman very upset that he had loaded a ton. First time reloader.
Oh, this was 2016. I was there.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Bought a ammo plant.
Oh, no.
And went to loading. Loaded his first 1,000 rounds of 5.56 range brass, pickup brass. None of it would chamber.
Oh, no.
And he simply had his sizing die out of adjustment. That was it. All he had was his sizing die, not threaded down. I mean, we're talking 3 or 4 thousandths of an inch, the thickness of this piece of paper. That was the difference between that round chambering and not. And he had 1,000 of them loaded with a bullet inside.
I've had customers come to me in the custom world wanting me to make them a die that they could put their loaded rounds that they loaded in, just like this gentleman, and want to size them so that it would squeeze them down. And I told him, nope, but that's dangerous. We're not going to do it. You get to pull a bunch of bullets. That's a good thing. It's a good learning experience.
Yeah. Pain retains.
That's why dummy rounds are important.
Yep, because that whole thing could have been circumvented if he took his first round off the press with no primer, no powder, and just said, all right, let's make sure this fits. But he did.
That's all it needed.
So that's a novice mistake. I've done it, not on that scale.
I've pulled plenty of bullets.
Oh, yeah, we've all pulled
bullets. Just because we're experts doesn't mean we've never pulled bullets. I've pulled a lot of them.
That's probably why we're experts. We've learned what not to do. And experts is obviously a loose term. I'm sure I'll get crucified there. But either way, this is all I had on the list of just some things that the novice might not be able to find written out. Just some overlooked, some of the nuance to hand loading that not everybody knows. And once you know it, and usually you either had to find out from experience or ask somebody who found out from experience.
It's like when you do it, it just became second nature. So we as has-beens, as I explained earlier, would be, it's taken for granted.
Exactly.
Yeah. Like, oh, you should have just done that. I'm sorry. I should have told you that, right?
Yep.
Well, and you could probably, if you had enough time on your hands, you could probably scour the internet and find the answers. But
it's nice to get them from a trusted source.
Well,
and
you know my
this
theory
is newer
on the
media.
internet. I don't trust it.
But a lot of times people are driving to work and they turn something like this on, and we wanted to put it in here in podcast form.
We want to save you from making the mistakes that we've probably all made.
Sure. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And do put your questions at the bottom if you have them. And
if you got some questions,
get you an answer.
Absolutely.
We can, simple questions.
Yeah. And if it's something directly for us that we can address on the podcast, great. Yeah. podcast@hornady.com. Drop them in as a comment on YouTube. If you have some questions about reloading, just kind of general topics or a certain procedure, we've been talking about it a lot. Our technical service staff, that's a team ready for you.
Yep.
Call them, 800-338-3220. Press extension 3. It'll bounce you right up there to tech, and you'll get a guy on the phone that hunts, that shoots, that reloads. Almost all of them up there are doing competitive shooting in some degree. So you'll get an expert on the phone to walk you through some of this as well.
And I'll add, if they don't have the answer, they'll find it.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So I don't have anything else. I can't think of anything else. I'm sure there's some, but is there anything that you guys want to leave the listener with?
Again, we've probably forgotten it if there was something we did need to, that on your list of things. I don't.
I would just say that if you're just starting in it and you feel unsure or, unconfident, guess what? We were too.
Yep.
And don't let everything you heard inundate you to the point that you let your press sit and your book sit and your powder sit and you don't do anything with it. Because I promise you, once you get it in there and make that first one go bang, you're going to get this, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was cool.
Yep. I agree.
Right.
And it's a little nerve-wracking, but you get over it.
Yeah, you
Oh
do.
yeah, oh yeah, you get over it really fast. And again, when powder was $35 a pound and primers were 2 cents a pop, it was easy to go down that rabbit hole in a darn hurry.
Yep. Or when you couldn't find 223
Oh,
on
yeah.
the shelf, you couldn't find
Oh,
it.
yeah.
You had to load it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Heck, they were selling 22 LR reloading kits. Remember
Oh
that?
my gosh, that was wild.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Well,
yeah.
guys, thanks for coming on the show. Thanks for your reloading expertise. Let's get back to it. And again, thanks for coming on the show.
You bet.
All right, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this and found it at least somewhat educational. Some of those nuanced things about reloading that aren't clearly written down for the new and the novice reloader. Hopefully you took something away from this. We appreciate you listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.